Hello and welcome from the Atlantic Council. I am Kirsten Fontenrose, Director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative here at the Council. We have a special opportunity today to hear directly from the two people who oversee U.S. humanitarian engagement in Yemen. The conflict in Yemen, compounded by natural disasters and health crises, has led to economic freefall and currency devaluation, to a severe lack of food and fuel resources, and massive internal displacement. More than 80% of Yemen's population requires humanitarian assistance, but humanitarian funding from the international community is not sufficient to provide aid to everyone who needs it. The US is and has been one of the largest donors to the humanitarian response. The new Biden administration has signaled that resolving the conflict in Yemen and providing humanitarian relief are among its top foreign policy priorities. To brief us today on the administration's policies going forward, the Atlantic Council is delighted to welcome Tim Lenderking, U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, and Sarah Charles, USAID Assistant to the Administrator for the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Let's meet them. Prior to his role as U.S. Special Envoy, Mr. Lenderking served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Arabian Peninsula Affairs in the Near East Bureau at the U.S. Department of State. He is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service with posts including Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia from 2013 to 16, Director of the Pakistan Office at the Department of State from 2010 to 13, and in 2008 to 10 as Senior Democracy Advisor at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and again in Baghdad as the Policy Advisor to the Commanding General of Multinational Forces in Iraq. Mr. Lenderking has also served in Kuwait, Morocco, Bangladesh, and Syria. Particularly notable for his current role and our conversation today, Mr. Lenderking had a career prior to joining the Foreign Service in the refugee field, where he held numerous positions with American NGOs, with the United Nations in New York, Sudan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Thailand. Mr. Lenderking holds a master's degree in history and international relations from the University of Washington and a bachelor's degree with honors from Wesleyan University. He is the recipient of the Presidential Merit Award, 9 Superior Honor Awards from the Department of State, and the Meritorious Civilian Service Award from the Department of the Army for his service in Iraq. Also, we are lucky to have with us Ms. Sarah Charles. Sarah Charles is the Assistant to the Administrator of USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the U.S. government's lead for international disaster response. Prior to joining the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, Ms. Charles was the Senior Director for Policy and Advocacy at the International Rescue Committee, where she led efforts to reform the humanitarian aid system and promote policies to improve the lives of refugees and other conflict-affected people. She also served at the National Security Council at the White House, first as Director for Humanitarian Affairs, and then as Director and Acting Senior Director for Strategic Planning, where she oversaw policy for refugees and migration during a crisis period. Before the NSC, Ms. Charles covered the Middle East for USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives, the United States government's primary political transition and post-conflict assistance instrument. We used to call it the Black Ops of USAID. Ms. Charles holds a Bachelor of Arts in Government and Geography from Dartmouth College and a Master's in Public Affairs from Princeton University. Moderating the conversation today will be Dr. Nabil Houri, a career American diplomat who served as U.S. Deputy Chief of Mission in Yemen from 2004 to 2007. Nabil retired from the Department of State after 25 years of service with the rank of Minister Counselor in 2013 and has taught Middle East and U.S. strategy courses at the National Defense University and at Northwestern University. Add Nabil's book to your reading list. It is called Bunker Diplomacy, Personal Reflections of 25 Years of U.S. Policy in the Middle East, an Arab American in the Foreign Service, for an inside look at what it's like to be Arab American serving for the US government in the Arab world. Tim, in honor of Poets Corner, and Nabil, in honor of your own poetry, a few lines from Yemeni British poet Amra Salah, spoken word work, My Yemen is Beautiful, to kick us off. I don't know the dangerous Yemen you talk to me about. This Yemen you are showing me isn't the one my mother longs for. I don't know where you got this Yemen from. I don't know where you got this Yemen from, but this Yemen isn't mine. Nabil, over to you. Nabil, we can't hear you. Would you mind restarting your words?
Oh, how about this?
That's
Right?
wonderful.
Okay, somebody muted me. So I was just saying thank you very much, Kirsten, for the beautiful words, the poetic look on Yemen and the tragedy that is Yemen today. Welcome, everybody, and a special welcome to our VIP guests, Tim Lenderking and Sarah Charles, both very busy with diplomacy and humanitarian work in Yemen. So let's get right to it. We've agreed to start with Tim. And Tim, you're just back from a whirlwind tour of the Gulf. You have met with and or spoken to most of the main warring parties and mediators and diplomats helping out. The question on everybody's mind is, why don't we have a ceasefire yet? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nabil, and thank you, Kirsten and the Atlantic Council, for organizing and hosting me and my colleague Sarah Charles this morning. It's a great opportunity, and I'm just very grateful to have the chance to update you all on what I've been doing and sort of the state of play. And if I could take a moment to comment on that, as you all have seen, President Biden made one of his first foreign policy priorities ending the terrible war in Yemen, appointing a special envoy to work toward that end. And I've been intensively engaged with UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths, the leadership in Saudi Arabia, Oman, the government of Yemen, as well as other regional states and parties to put the elements together for a nationwide ceasefire. I also talk to Yemenis. I don't publicize all of those engagements. I don't believe you can be an envoy to Yemen without talking to the Yemeni people. It's their country, after all. We now have a sound plan for a nationwide ceasefire with elements that would immediately address Yemen's dire humanitarian situation directly. That plan has been before the Houthi leadership for a number of days. Because I think we all know, and Sarah will comment on this, that only through a durable ceasefire can we hope to reverse the direct humanitarian crisis. Supporting such an agreement is precisely why I spent the last 17 days in the region. That was my second trip since being appointed the envoy. Tragically and somewhat confusingly for me, it appears that the Houthis are prioritizing a military campaign to take Marib, home to over 1 million IDPs, over suspending the war and moving relief to the Yemeni people. The US and UN we urge the Houthis to respond. That's why I was in the region for these last 2 weeks, and I will return immediately when the Houthis are prepared to talk. Saudi Arabia is largely committed to a unilateral ceasefire since September of last year, despite more than 30 Houthi attacks deep into the country with missiles and drones in this month alone. The US is gravely concerned by the humanitarian situation in Yemen and remains one of its largest assistance providers. Secretary Blinken personally attended the March 1st Donors Conference to help raise the funds necessary to meet Yemen's great needs. And just today, the U.S. restored humanitarian assistance funding to North Yemen to help meet the region's critical need. As you may have heard from Secretary Blinken's remarks on March 1st, the United States announced nearly $191 million in additional humanitarian assistance from the United States, bringing our fiscal year 2021 funding up to more than $350 million. And this is not the end of U.S. assistance to help ameliorate the crisis this year. In total, we've provided $3.4 billion in humanitarian assistance to alleviate the suffering of the people of Yemen since the crisis began 6 years ago. As you all know, the Biden administration removed the designations of Ansar Allah as a group because we felt that if not revoked, this would have caused a profound negative impact on the humanitarian environment, like impeding the delivery of critical aid and commercial imports into Yemen. The revocation of our designations is an illustration of our policy of prioritizing the humanitarian situation and ensuring humanitarian assistance reaches the Yemeni people. To that end, I think it is clear that the support for the free flow of fuel, food, and other essential goods into Yemen is critical. But doing so requires not only that goods make it through the ports, but also that they are allowed to move through the country freely through areas under Houthi control. And we know that the Houthis continue to impede that flow, including diverting money from imports that was intended for civilian salaries, in direct violation of their commitments under a UN agreement. As a result, civil servants are not getting paid and therefore have no money to purchase what food is available. I know you've seen reports in the press lately to the contrary, but in reality, food is consistently arriving at Hodeidah port, according to data provided by the UN Verification and Inspection Mechanism. Unfortunately, we cannot ensure that food that passes through the port reaches those in need, as that area is under Houthi control. The U.S. will work with the government of Yemen and Saudi Arabia to find a way to deliver fuel and ensure it makes it to the Yemenis who need it most, that is not confiscated for sale on the black market. I'll simply close by stressing that if we cannot make progress now, the country will spiral into greater conflict and instability. A unified international effort is needed to support this goal. Now it is the time to come to the table to negotiate to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and create a path for a more peaceful future. Let us seize this moment. Nabil, back to you and thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Obviously, the battle for Ma'rib has become a very critical point. It could turn into a peace effort if it stops right away. Or, as you said, it could spiral into many more years of war. What is your vision? If everything goes according to plan, ideally, how do you see us moving from this ferocious battle for Ma'rib to total peace in Yemen and the region? Do you have benchmarks you hope you can reach?
We sure do, Nabil. And you know, the president asked me really to focus on two tracks. One is the political track, and one is the humanitarian track. And obviously, working very closely with USAID is key to our success. I take it as a very important principle, talking to a wide cross section of people. I mentioned Yemenis, but we also obviously, talk to the governments involved, and that was a key goal, I think, of my regional trip, was to line up international support for Yemen. And I did that by talking throughout my stops with European ambassadors in the EU, European ambassadors to Yemen and to the various countries I visited, to the Gulf, the leaderships of the Gulf states, and ensuring that we were in constant touch with humanitarian actors as well. So I prioritized being in regular contact with international humanitarian organizations. I speak regularly to the ICRC. Yesterday I met with WFP Executive Director David Beasley here in Washington. And all of these parts are really necessary to understanding the totality of the challenge and being able to, I think, drive all of these actors onto a common approach. And I mentioned the ceasefire, Nabil, because obviously what we need to do, I think, is incentivize the parties to put the weapons down. And you mentioned Marib being a particular flashpoint right now. It's a strategically important city in North Yemen. It is one of the remaining strongholds of the Yemeni government in the north, and it's also an oil platform. So one can understand why the Houthis are going for it, but it's causing a huge humanitarian toll. And we've also seen that Saudi Arabia, really for the first time in 6 months, hit targets in Sana'a as well. I mean, military conflict in this sort of kinetic priority is really contrary to what we're trying to do. And so pushing all sides to put down the weapons. There are multiple actors in Yemen who are armed and, somehow part of attempting to gain more territory. We think it's fruitless at this point. Let's rally behind what we're trying to do, what the UN Special Envoy, Martin Griffiths, is trying to do, and indeed behind the support, I think, that we have from the regional governments. There's very strong support, Nabil, for ending the conflict now. That's a very important principle that I heard resoundingly as I made my way through the Middle East on this last trip.
Godspeed, Tim. This is really critical work that you're doing. Let's turn to Sarah. And Sarah, the media has done a good job, a fair job in the past year or so in advertising the human misery going on in Yemen. I think almost everybody today, big powers, small powers, regular folks, NGOs, know the extent of the suffering of the Yemeni people. But with all that attention and donor countries pledging money, um, there is famine. We're not at the door of famine. There is actual famine in most parts of Yemen. Why isn't that goodwill and the aid and the money pledged getting to the people who need it? What's the problem?
First, I want to say thank you, Nabil, and thank you, Kirsten, for bringing us together today. And in particular, thank you, Tim. He's been such a good partner as we embark on really this next phase of U.S. engagement around Yemen. It's so helpful to have a special envoy who not only has deep political and diplomatic experience, but also has a background as a humanitarian as we try and really tackle these very much related challenges of bringing an end to the conflict and getting aid to those who need it most. I was really struck by Kirsten's words, her poem that started us off today. On a personal note, I first traveled to work in Yemen 11 years ago this month, and her entreaty of what is this Yemen that you speak really speaks to me as someone who was lucky enough to travel and work in Yemen 5 years before this current phase of the crisis. And I really just want to start by taking a moment to recognize the people at the heart of this crisis and the brave humanitarians, almost all Yemeni, working on the front lines to reach people in need. As you noted, Nabil, there are 20 million Yemenis who every day are struggling to survive without basic necessities. More than 2 million young children facing deadly malnutrition this year alone, and families who find their lives uprooted over and over as conflict lines shift and are made more vulnerable each time they're forced to flee. I also want to take a minute to acknowledge the tragic fire and explosion at a migrant facility in Sana'a just this week and express my sincere condolences to the families of those that were killed and injured. We're working with our partners to provide aid to the people who were affected. And in recent weeks, as you started your conversation with Tim, one of our most pressing concerns has been the escalating conflict in Marib. We're closely monitoring the situation, and our partners are already scaling up assistance despite significant challenges accessing affected communities. We're extremely concerned about the humanitarian consequences of this fighting in Marib. At a time when Yemen is already facing the very real threat of famine, the Houthis' offensive threatens to displace hundreds of thousands more people, many of whom who have already been forced to flee multiple times, and place further strain on an already stretched humanitarian operation. But this escalation of violence is just the latest episode in this 6-year conflict, which continues to drive a humanitarian crisis that, Nabil, as you said, by most accounts is the worst in the world. Again, I'm very grateful for Special Envoy Lenderking's critical efforts to negotiate an end to this conflict, which is the only way we're going to see the end of suffering for the Yemeni people. And as we urgently work towards a political solution, we are committed to doing everything we can to reach the women, children, and men who are affected by this crisis. Through our UN and NGO partners, we're responding to urgent needs throughout the entire country, providing emergency food assistance, working to prevent and treat malnutrition, distribution of basic necessities such as hygiene supplies to displaced families, rehabilitating water tanks and pipes so communities have safe drinking water, repairing roads to improve access to vulnerable communities, and helping parents earn an income and rebuild their lives. We're supporting efforts to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and one of the world's worst cholera outbreaks, and working urgently to prevent famine, which has once again, as you said, become a very real threat. Every month, our assistance reaches 8.5 million vulnerable people in Yemen. We have consistently been one of the largest donors to the humanitarian response. As Tim mentioned, the US has already provided more than $350 million in assistance this fiscal year, and more will come. The assistance that Secretary Blinken announced last week is just part of the assistance that we intend to provide this year, as compounding crisis, including the escalating conflict in Marib most notably, economic collapse, and the pandemic are rapidly increasing needs. We also continue to work urgently with the UN and other donors to push all parties to cease interference in aid operations. This interference delays and prevents vital aid from reaching those who need it, inhibits humanitarian actors from accurately and independently assessing needs, and puts our partner staff in danger as they face threats and harassment from authorities. While our partners are confronting this interference throughout the country, it has been most egregious in the north, where Houthi obstruction reached such heights last year that USAID made the difficult decision to partially suspend some NGO assistance award. In recent months, we've seen some signs of decreasing interference in the north, though more progress is needed. We've also been working urgently with our partners on a way forward that enables them to respond despite the remaining challenges, while ensuring that our assistance is reaching its intended recipients without interference. As Tim alluded to in his remarks, through these efforts, as of today, USAID will now be shifting our approach to cautiously resume humanitarian support for NGO programs in northern Yemen, with new operational parameters that aim to ensure our partners can deliver assistance in a timely manner without undue interference. We're also adding new monitoring requirements to track attempts at this interference and give us the flexibility to adjust or terminate funding to specific activities or programs as necessary. This new way forward reflects hard-won progress by the humanitarian community over the past year in collectively advocating in Yemen with the Houthis to cease interference in aid operations. This progress means our partners will be better able to understand where needs are greatest, cater relief efforts to meet those needs, and ensure that their assistance is reaching the people for whom it's intended. For example, our partner, the World Food Program, has been able to start biometrically registering beneficiaries, which helps them ensure the most vulnerable people are the ones receiving food assistance each month. The Houthis must now abide by these commitments they have made to end their obstruction. We will continue this advocacy with our partners, other donors, and David Gressley, the new UN humanitarian coordinator in Yemen, to push for unimpeded and sustained access to people in need across the country. Humanitarian assistance is vital to saving lives and reducing suffering, but it must be able to reach the people who need it most. We are monitoring this closely to ensure our assistance is provided in a principled manner. If our partners are unable to operate independently, we may be forced to end support for some programs. Humanitarian assistance can't solve the roots of this crisis. Special Envoy Lenderking's work finding a political solution to this conflict to end the suffering of Yemen's people is absolutely critical. And we're working urgently with our colleagues at the State Department to support the dual-track approach to this crisis that Lenderking has outlined. Together, we're committed to bringing peace, prosperity, and security to Yemen. With that, I very much look forward to continuing our conversation, Nabil, with you and with others that are on the line today.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. A big question on a lot of people's minds is, how does aid logistically get to people in a war zone? The whole country has so many fronts that are flaring up from time to time, and currently a very bad one in Marib. And let's face it, there is a siege. We haven't mentioned that Yemeni airports and seaports are blocked. I mean, whether by air or by sea or by land. So give us a quick idea of the logistics of American assistance. How does it move from Washington, where money is pledged, to services on the ground? Maybe the steps would help people understand how this works or doesn't work.
It's a very good question, Nabil. And I will say we have some of our most experienced, creative, and expeditious partners working in Yemen these days. Unfortunately, as you well know, this conflict has been going on for quite some time, and our partners have grown very experienced in working all angles to get assistance to those who need it the most. In fact, the lifting of the partial suspension in northern Yemen is in part because we feel like we've worked out a way forward with our partners that will allow them to navigate this very difficult operational environment. It's absolutely critical that all parties allow both commercial imports and humanitarian imports of assistance into Yemen. There certainly is more work that needs to be done in that space. And one of the ways that we get assistance to those who need it the most is really a very diverse group of local, international, UN actors who are able to operate, some at different scale and different modalities in different places throughout the country. So one approach that USAID has taken has really been diversifying our partner base, investing in partners who are very experienced in operating, have contacts, can negotiate access, can do the types of assessment and targeting that we know is necessary to ensure when we are able to get assistance into the country that it's going to those who need it the most.
Okay, well, our time is limited, so let's go to some of the questions coming in from the audience. And one of them is talking about logistics, a good segue into banking. Given the difficulty of moving money, given the difficulty of Yemen's central bank being in the south and no access to the north, how does that impact humanitarian assistance?
Banking is certainly a challenge that our humanitarian partners have in a number of locales, not just Yemen, but of course, Syria and elsewhere. And we, as the administration, are very much committed to working through with our partners in close collaboration with the Treasury Department, with the Department of State, and others. What kind of communication assurances that we can give partners. There's a lot of de-risking that has happened in Yemen and elsewhere around the operating environment, the sanctions that are in place that do make it difficult for banking services in the country. But we're very committed to working with our partners to work through these issues. And so I would encourage, I'm not sure exactly where that question came from, but I'd encourage them to reach out so we can try and work through these problems together. Tim, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
I'd love to add a point, Sarah. That's excellent. I mean, I think we recognize that humanitarian assistance alone is not going to bring full relief to the Yemeni people. So that's a really important question that was asked. And USAID provides some support to the Central Bank of Yemen. We can see that the economic factors in Yemen have been on a downward trajectory even before the conflict started, unfortunately. So stabilizing the economic situation in Yemen is really fundamental. So providing that support and technical assistance to the Central Bank of Yemen, making sure that the Central Bank of Yemen is solvent and that its accounts are maintained and that its accounts and the funds deposited in it are used for the purposes for which they were set. One of the themes that I encountered in my tour through the region this last trip, which coincided with the March 1st Donors Conference, which we have talked about, is the fact that there is, I mean, it's conventionally called donor fatigue, but it's really a bit different from that. Is the sense that money spent on Yemen is not going toward a better purpose, and that's why the work that I'm doing and that I think the United States is engaged in on the political process is so important, because that's one of the ways that we're going to entice donors back into Yemen. There are going to be huge needs. Unfortunately, as we know, the war is creating a problem where you can't do the full extent of humanitarian work. We've mentioned IDPs, all of the kinetic activity, civilian casualties, and then you've got a COVID situation on top of everything else. So this is a hugely stressed out situation. And that's why the economic piece is so important to get right, in addition to the humanitarian work that Sarah and Nabil have described.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Without getting into the privacy of conversations you've had in the region, obviously those are protected for the time being. But we've heard about the obstructionism of the Houthis, from their desire to push on to a total victory in Ma'rib, which is delaying a ceasefire, to abuses in the areas under their governance, which have become public knowledge. But what is the level of cooperation that you're getting from the Arab coalition, specifically Saudi Arabia? The Houthis have placed the lifting of the siege as a precondition to further progress on peace. Is that something the Saudis are willing to do? And where does that fit into your progression from here to peace?
That's super important because the fact that fuel ships are not moving is a genuine problem. This is the subject of my conversation yesterday with David Beasley about how we get those fuel ships moving. It's the fuel is not only for motor vehicles, it's for homes, it's for hospitals, it's for the institutions. So I think that's a genuine problem that we have to address and are addressing. I think more broadly than that, when you talk about support from the coalition, it's there. It is there, and I can tell you, having spent a considerable amount of time in Riyadh just in the past couple of weeks, the Saudi leadership is prepared to address the conflict in a way that maybe they weren't prepared 6 months ago or 12 months ago, and they're providing full support for my efforts. And I do think that is absolutely critical. I'm looking for the same response from the other side. I'm eager for it. We've never said, and we do not subscribe to any notion that the Houthis have no role in Yemen. They are a significant player. They are a significant military force. That must be acknowledged. That is a reality in Yemen. And so I don't think you can operate by denying that reality. However, responsible behavior is really important. And particularly what we're looking for is a sign of responsiveness to the proposal that's on the table. Because I think it has elements that can work very quickly to addressing the whole set of issues that we're talking about here today.
Okay. One series of questions we often get, both here and in the media, is that the complexities inside Yemen are such that even if the big powers in the world and the regional powers stop fueling the war and say, we're going to end this war any way we can, the internal parties to the Yemen conflict will likely go on fighting. Can you project, once we get to that level, once the regional war stops, and at least there is a ceasefire from the Houthis and Saudis and the Hadi government, how do we move from there to resolving the tensions inside Yemen? There are so many tribes and warring factions and parties, not to mention there is still an AQAP and ISIS presence. How do we settle all that?
Very important issue. I think, first of all, you have to start with the fact that if you look at recent history, Nabil, and the national dialogue that was taking place in Sana'a before this crisis really erupted, I mean, there were all elements of Yemeni society engaging together: women's groups, civil society, the Houthis, different Yemeni political parties. I don't think anybody could deny that if you get the Yemenis in the room together, they can work this out. And as I said at the top, it's their country, and the outside powers, no matter even the United States as a superpower, we're not going to be able to force a solution onto Yemen. And I think we recognize that. But getting Yemenis in the room together has been difficult. I was there in Stockholm breaking bread with the Houthis and with the Yemeni government and in 2018, and we thought we had something good. We all shook hands, we embraced, we called each other brother and sister, and things fell apart, very quickly because, the different sides didn't live up to their agreements, and both sides have their own narratives about that. So I want to stress that we're not here for a quick solution. I mean, we're not here just to get a ceasefire and say Yemen is done and walk away. The United States wants to see this through until we really have a situation that is stabilized, so you can start to rebuild the country, which is so difficult given the challenges now. You mentioned outside powers, as in any civil war, whether it's Lebanon or Libya or in Iraq, the more outsiders that are involved, the more difficult it is to resolve the situation. And so that's another reason why I spent a lot of time on this trip, is talking to some of the outside powers in the Gulf to make sure that we're all on the same script, to make sure that the Gulf countries are aligned with us, with the United Nations, in forging the kind of peace deal that will happen and that will enable the different Yemeni parties to get in the room together.
Tim and Sarah, maybe we could close on a more hopeful note, possibly. I have personally been very impressed with Yemeni civil society. Those groups led by young men and women, both inside Yemen and outside. There are so many educated young Yemenis in Europe, in the US, working very hard on humanitarian issues, human rights issues, and writing and thinking and dialoguing on the peace process. How do you envision bringing them in, using their expertise and their advice, and from an AID perspective, helping them do the work they do? Tim?
I'd be happy to start and have Sarah jump in. I mean, again, I've been out to Detroit last year to talk to the Yemeni American community, and they brought together Yemeni Americans from all over the country, and I think that's talking to the diaspora communities is important. I've met with Yemenis in different capitals around the world, and it is culturally it's such a rich country. It's a beautiful country. The elements of the society that need to be brought together, they're there. And I think people are genuinely tired of this conflict. And that's another important, pillar, I think, that we have to draw on. I think the Yemenis are hungry to get to the next phase of their future and put this conflict behind them. So again, I think you have to start with a small group, but you build out from there. And, the United States favors an inclusive process that reflects our own values, but I think it also reflects the reality of Yemen, as you say, with its diversity. So again, getting Yemenis to talk to each other and work through with a few outside countries there to help nudge, cajole, persuade, that's the right approach.
Okay, Sarah?
Nabil, you started with a question about how do we get assistance to those who need it the most. And the reality is, I think when we talk about UN partners, when we talk about NGOs, you may have an image of Westerners coming in, but certainly in Yemen, and everywhere we work, but particularly in Yemen, the reality is this is local Yemenis, both the staff of some of the international organizations, but as critically, if not more importantly, local Yemeni organizations that we partner with, either directly or through international NGO partners, that really are the ones that their dedication, their mission, their creativity is what is allowing us to reach those 8.5 million Yemenis that USAID is reaching with assistance. So I couldn't agree with you more. There has been a flourishing of again, kind of Yemeni civil society in response to the humanitarian crisis. And it's absolutely critical to everything we've been able to do in terms of reaching those who are most in need. And I think it will be equally, if not more critical to the recovery effort in Yemen, should we get there soon.
Thank you. I think obviously right now the priority is ceasefire and ending this war. And always the people with the guns take priority in something like this, because they're the ones who can either keep fighting or who can stop fighting. But I think anything we can do to assist the young men and women of Yemen who are working very hard in covering, I mean, the news on social media, you go to the Yemenis covering and you'll get a much better idea than by going to the international media. And the human rights organizations have been doing an excellent job in covering the abuses by all sides of this conflict. Everywhere a party controls a piece of land, they are abusing the rights of the people who are living on it. And any assistance we can give to these organizations, I think, will help not only in ameliorating the conditions now, but in helping in the country's future social and political development, where these civil society groups are going to play a critical role. Thank you both very much for this excellent discussion and excellent insights. And let me turn to Kirsten to make some closing remarks.
This was a phenomenal session. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the clarity and the detail that you've offered us. I think this has answered a lot of questions for folks about how the conversations have gone abroad and where we might be going with this and what we should be expecting, and comments about how this is a long process, Tim, were really welcome just in terms of setting expectations. So I think you've now reset brains on many fronts about what we are looking at. And we're really grateful that you all stay in the trenches on this, and the guidance you're providing to the rest of the community and the leadership you're providing. Thank you today for providing that to us as well, and for keeping all of us informed on your efforts and the success and not the failures, but the challenges. And again, please let this entire interested community know anything that we can do to support your work or anything we can do to make your road easier. Thank you very, very much for sharing with us. See you all soon.
Thank you.